Natalia Butyrska, an expert on East Asian affairs and senior analyst at the New Europe Center, is now joining our broadcast. Natalia, good evening. I'm glad to welcome you live on the Freedom TV channel.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Natalia, we are always happy to have the opportunity to discuss such important topics with you. What do you think, as was already mentioned in our report? China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi noted that dialogue between the United States and China is vital, in order to prevent, as he pointed out, global mistakes. So, taking all this into account, both sides noted that it is necessary for both parties to prepare thoroughly, create favorable conditions, and resolve existing disagreements by removing unnecessary obstacles. And just yesterday we were also discussing this topic, and your colleague as well, our expert, mentioned that this meeting between the leaders of the two largest economies in the world is essentially intended to adjust the somewhat unbalanced relationships not only between themselves but also among a number of other countries. In your opinion, how achievable are these goals, considering that this still only hypothetically possible meeting is scheduled for early April? There is very little time left.
In fact, first and foremost, for the United States of America and for China, and most importantly, for the Trump administration, it is truly important to pave the way for relations between the two countries, because neither China nor the United States is ready for an economic war. They tried a tariff war, and as a result, both countries ended up with negative results. That is, the interconnectedness between the United States of America and China remains deep to this day, despite the fact that each country understands for itself that the future of the two countries is one of competition, and they are doing a lot, especially China is doing a lot, to feel secure, to be more self-sufficient and not depend on the United States of America, but the parties cannot give up this interaction. So first of all, it is important to pave the way. Trade is a step toward the countries resolving deeper issues between themselves. Because moreover, they are not interested in a hot conflict. And a hot conflict could arise. And you mentioned Taiwan in your report, that Taiwan and in general the Asia-Pacific region are within China's sphere of interest, because this is the region where the country is located. And in this region, the United States of America has traditionally been present. And therefore, when people talk about global conflicts in the world, it is constantly... Everyone points out that a hot global conflict could break out in the Asia-Pacific region, where the interests of these two countries overlap. That is precisely why it is important for both China and the US to prevent such a conflict from arising. Many experts talk about deeper agreements between China and the United States of America, because every now and then Donald Trump brings up the big two. The People's Republic of China, for its own part, has also repeatedly and clearly stated that the vastness of our world and the entire planet are certainly big enough for two influential and major global powers like China and the United States of America together to coexist peacefully. So it turns out that the expectations for this meeting at the global level are about issues of the global international order and questions of global conflicts, both in the Middle East and on the European continent. But I wouldn't set such high expectations, because there are still many unresolved issues between the United States of America and China, despite the fact that both sides are inclined toward dialogue and are working to reach an agreement, but they have a lot of bilateral issues to address. From my point of view, the time has not yet come for them to talk about any kind of division or some sort of global joint role. First and foremost, because China and the United States of America have completely different views of their global roles, and the expectations that exist in the world regarding China's desire to become a global power, and accordingly that it should take on responsibility as a global power, following the example of the United States, these expectations often lead to great disappointment because China sees itself in this world in a completely different way. And above all, it is about ensuring the interests and development of China. And the meeting with the United States is also about this, about the fact that China is very interested in the development of its economy. There are many difficulties in China's economy, and without the United States, without Western technologies, it will be difficult for China. That is precisely why China is now considering the possibility of a tactical truce and agreement That is exactly why China is working, and
He emphasized the critical necessity of both parties involved working diligently to pave a viable way toward reaching this mutual understanding. According to detailed reports from Yuri Ushakov, who serves as a senior foreign policy aide to the Kremlin's top leadership, the two sides engaged in a deeply businesslike, highly constructive, and remarkably frank conversation. This significant diplomatic exchange between the leaders continued steadily for a duration of approximately 1 full hour. The focus of the conversation was on the conflict surrounding Iran and negotiations on the Ukrainian settlement. And it should be noted that, according to Ushakov, the leaders had a substantive and useful exchange of views on the situation in Iran. Well, of course, one would like to know how, in fact, Beijing could change everything in the war that the Kremlin is waging against independent Ukraine in this situation. It's been going on for quite some time now. It should be noted that Beijing is doing everything possible to avoid any clarifications regarding how China, as noted, maintains strategic coordination on the issue of defending international law together with Russia, which in fact is one of its greatest violators and is using all its military advantage in the war against independent Ukraine. The fact is that at the meeting between Trump and Xi in early April, if, of course, it takes place, they will, without a doubt, address the Ukrainian issue and the war that Russia is waging against Ukraine in quite concrete terms. There is absolutely no doubt about that. But will Beijing change its position regarding the war? Beijing? Or will it continue to refer to it as the Ukrainian crisis? What do you think?
I think the situation will not change drastically. China will not fundamentally change its position either, and we can compare this with the conflict in the Middle East as an example. China's approach to the war taking place in the region, the definitions, the wording, China's involvement, and its desire to see the conflict end can be compared to China's actions regarding the Russia-Ukraine war. And here it is very important to point out things that clearly indicate China's interest in the Middle East and China's interest when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. China has clearly stated its position regarding support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Iran. It condemned the actions of the United States of America and Israel. It said that these countries should adhere to the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other states, including Iran. It said that it supports Iran and will in every possible way coordinate its actions with international and other partners regarding peace. In addition to calls to Middle Eastern countries, the chief Chinese diplomat also called his counterparts in the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. And most importantly, they also had a call with the Israeli foreign minister, where Wang Yi made it very clear that they do not support and they condemn the aggression, and that Iran must stop these actions. This whole picture shows that when China has its own interests at stake, including in a conflict, it can take a tougher stance, it can be more active diplomatically in order to support one side or another to call things by their proper names. More than 5 years have passed, but we have not heard anything from them. No condemnation of Russia's actions. No matter how much the Ukrainian side, European partners, or Americans have appealed to China, which has significant influence over Russia, to put pressure on Putin, we have not heard from China, either in its statements or in its appeals to Putin, that it supports the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Because China says that regarding Ukraine and the Russian-Ukrainian war, they support the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries. But which countries and whose integrity is something each country is left to interpret in its own way. They do not condemn the aggression. Moreover, they do not tell Putin to stop interfering in the affairs of an independent state. That is, as we have seen, China is not making efforts and moreover, unfortunately, supports Russia through indirect means in waging this war. Because economic and financial support, circumventing sanctions, and dual-use goods, all of this extends Russia's ability to wage war. At the same time, we do not see any active efforts from China when it comes to peace, Therefore, after the meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, from my point of view, China may say and continue to say at the official level that it supports negotiations and peace, but without action, without any change of tone regarding the approach that China currently employs toward Russia, when it explicitly equates Russia as the aggressor and Ukraine as the nation Russia has attacked. I do not anticipate, unfortunately, that we will see any significant changes in China's policy. And as for the Ukrainian crisis, as they also call Russia's war against Ukraine,
Natalia, and really just very briefly, what would need to happen for Beijing's position to change? So that, as both Whitaker and Kellogg have said more than once, China could literally end this war with a single phone call? Just 40 seconds, no more than that.
China would have to stop supporting Russia financially and economically and stop buying its energy resources. A single phone call is not enough. That's a utopia. But China won't do that, unfortunately, because China is a beneficiary of this war. They coordinate their actions at the international level. And in this case, China's interests, unfortunately, are far from Ukraine. But nevertheless, as we can see, it tries to appeal to European countries and sometimes makes gestures that might suggest supposedly China is changing its policy. But unfortunately, this is just China's attempt to show that it is acting positively in a direction where it is actually doing nothing.
Natalia, thank you so much for finding the opportunity to join us live today. As always, very interesting and informative. Natalia Butyrska, an expert on East Asian affairs. A senior analyst at the New Europe Center was a guest on the live broadcast on the Freedom TV channel.